Greetings to everyone joining us at this panel discussion on the 17th Malaysia International Halal Showcase. I'm Nazareen Ebrahim, CEO at Naz Consulting International. We're a premier African communications business. It's really exciting today to have such an esteemed panel to talk to us about South Africa as a progressive halal producer. We have on our panel, I want to introduce them very briefly, Mr. Moulana Navlakhi, Director at one of South Africa's leading halal certification bodies, South African National Halal Authority, or as you know them, SANHA. Mr. Rashid Toefy, Deputy Director General for Economic Development and Tourism in the Western Cape, and Ms. Zaida Enver, CEO of Pure Grit Events and Exhibitions Management. But first, we want to do an introduction by His Excellency, our High Commissioner from South Africa to Malaysia, Mr. Dave Evan Malcomson, before we come in talking about the situation and what the relations look like between Malaysia and South Africa. His Excellency, Mr. Dave Malcomson. Mr. Dave, are you there? Okay, we'll take away Mr. Dave and bring him in as he becomes available. Let's look at our discussion for today. There's a Just Beef Farmers Day that took place here in Pietermaritzburg, KZN, South Africa at the end of August. Our Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry there talked about how the access to markets, particularly in the Middle East and the ASEAN region, for local beef farmers was of great importance. South Africa and Malaysia enjoy a really great and exciting progressive relationship, particularly in the halal landscape. The potential for deeper bilateral trade relations, bolstered by a focus on developing the African market, is key. And with South Africa's status as one of the top global producers of halal products, due to its access to the rest of the continent and its highly advanced halal certification programs, it's no wonder that the potential for deeper bilateral trade agreements is great. The objective of this session is to understand the halal export market in the Malaysia-South Africa trade context, increasing the manufacturing base through foreign direct investment, and developing African manufacturing companies in export and halal compliance standards. Those are just some of the things that we want to look at. In light of this, we have our esteemed panelists, as we've introduced them before, talking across the various sections that give us more insight into this. Moulana Navlakhi will take us through what certifying bodies look like in South Africa. We've got top 3 certifying bodies in South Africa, which is why we are currently looked at in the African market as a leader and go-to. So too is Malaysia with JAKIM. Certifying bodies play a strategic role, not just in ensuring compliance, but in promotion of a halal lifestyle. Ms. Zaida Enver will look at why South Africa is considered one of the major global producers of halal goods and services, and Mr. Rashid Toefy, bilateral initiatives and what the Western Cape is doing to develop the halal economy in the region. Also, the potential for these producers to forge partnerships with ASEAN and Africa. We have to remember that ASEAN has one of the largest free trade blocs, and with the African continental free trade area presenting the largest free trade area in the world due to a number of countries participating, the potential for growth is only beginning in a post-pandemic world. Mr. Malcomson, we have you back, I see. We'd now like to bring back His Excellency, our High Commissioner for South Africa to Malaysia, Mr. Dave Malcomson. Welcome. I think we have you on mute there, sir, just to check your audio. Would our organizers check audio, please, if we may? Okay, seems that we are having an audio glitch coming through. We will bring back Mr. Malcomson. I would like to continue now with the program, if I may. I just want to get some direction from our organizers here, if I may proceed. I know that our first speaker on our panel, Mr. Malcomson, would come on, I think, at the end to help us understand and articulate before we go into our panel discussion, I think. it will be interesting to hear from our High Commissioner. So let's do it that way. Let's tell you how the session will run today. We have a 45-minute session. We've got 3 speakers in our panel. They will all give us a 7-minute presentation each. I've introduced you to them. We will then have a 15-minute moderated discussion. And prior to that moderation of that discussion, I would like to have our Commissioner come in to give us his remarks and his thoughts about the presentations. Then we will have closing remarks. Remember that you can send us questions on the chat screen. Please send them through and we will gladly take them. To kick off our presentation, Mr. Zaida Navlakhi, Moulana Zaida Navlakhi, is the director at the SANHA, South African National Halal Authority. And this morning, he will be talking to us about the importance of the certification with halal bodies, SANHA being one of the biggest halal bodies and also leading certification standards on the African continent. Mr. Navlakhi, Moulana Navlakhi, welcome.
نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Jazakallah khair to our MC and to all our panelists, including our Honorable High Commissioner in Malaysia. Welcome to South Africa. Each year we have an opportunity to reach out to our counterparts in Malaysia, but due to the pandemic, we now have to meet each other virtually. We meet you with the greetings of Islam. Assalamu alaikum, and good morning to some parts of the world and good afternoon to other parts of the world and maybe good evening to some other parts of the world. I think before we proceed on talking about the halal landscape in South Africa, I think it's important to understand the relationship that Africa as a continent has with Islam. 1400 years ago, Africa, when early Muslims were being persecuted in Arabia, Africa was the continent that gave refuge and that granted refuge to the early Muslims at that time, 1400 years ago. It was King Negus of Abyssinia that did that. Because of that seed that was planted of that relationship, we have of the 1.5 billion Muslim population of Africa, which is 25% of the global population, approximately 700 million Muslims make up the population of Africa, which is a third of the world's Muslim population. South Africa, as a country, you'll probably be surprised with this fact, because many people that we meet, they are of the opinion that you must be having a very huge Muslim population, but we're just about 2 million Muslims in South Africa, and we're not a 4 or 5 decade old community like many parts of the world. We're a 4-century-old community in this country. 400 years of Islamic history in this country. The earliest Muslims also coincidentally came from the greater Malayu Java area. So that's the connection that Islam and Muslims have with Malaysia, Indonesia, and that part of Southeast Asia. Very well-established community. Amazing infrastructure. We have more than 1,000 mosques in the country, all built by the community. No Muslim governments or no government at all assisted with the building of this infrastructure. Yes, our governments has been very, very cooperative in supporting the Muslim community and allowing it the freedom of religion, which is a trait that you wouldn't find in many parts of the world. If you go through some of our areas, you'd think you're in an Islamic country. There are about 25 institutions of higher Islamic learning in South Africa, and students from all across the globe, including Malaysia. There's a huge segment of Malaysian students also that attend our higher Islamic institutes of learning. Very strong Muslim business community. And if you're talking about halal now, we come back to the halal certification bodies. We are among the oldest halal certification environment in the world. South Africa has about a 5 decade-old history of halal certification in the country. Unlike other countries, we haven't been issuing halal certificates mainly for the objective wasn't for the Middle East or any other Muslim country. The objective was the community of our own country, and therefore we have a very matured and very strong, developed halal industry in this country as well. 50% of the FMCG industry in South Africa, the fast-moving consumer goods industry, is halal. And that's an amazing feat, really, for a population of 2 million Muslims. All major large-scale commercial poultry and beef abattoirs are certified halal, notwithstanding the fact that you have just a 2% Muslim population, but you have approximately a 35% halal Muslim community in terms of the trade industry and trade sector. And yes, South Africa's supreme quality lamb and beef is known to all, and we're glad that Malaysia has opened its borders to the meat products also from South Africa just recently. There are more than 10,000 halal certified establishments in the country. There are more than 2,000 halal restaurants available in the country. So tourists never ever have a problem in this country. They get authentic halal product wherever you go, unlike many other countries where you would have that challenge. And yes, because of our long-standing, matured halal industry, we have very good, strong links with Jakim, maybe stretching over 3 decades now, and have been part of Jakim's recognized bodies, global recognized bodies. We also had the good fortune of recently being appointed to the International Halal Authority Board in Malaysia. So yes, I don't know if my 7 minutes are up, but I think from our side, assurance I can give you is that the halal environment, the halal industry, the halal certification in South Africa is amazing. It has a huge amount of transparency. They're not private, individual-owned entities. South Africa's halal certification is certification by community representatives, by community organizations. Absolutely amazing, transparent, accountable service with integrity. Thank you.
Jazakallah, Moulana Navlakhi. The word that stands out for me is, of course, transparency. I think key to everyone interacting and playing in this particular environment, especially in this landscape, is the trust that's built because of the transparency, and the certification standards that you have set as an organization are indeed true to that commitment. Now, up next, we've got Deputy Director General at the Western Cape Economic Development for Tourism, Mr. Rashid Toefy, will be taking us through the Western Cape's approach to what the halal standard means for the province and why we can look at not only the rest of South Africa, but also in agreement with Malaysia, look at why they are good examples. We'd like to welcome now Mr. Rashid Toefy.
Thank you very much, Nazareen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome everybody. It's fantastic to be here. Just 2 years ago, I attended the World Halal Conference and was in KL, and it's a shame to be only coming remotely, but it's wonderful to just be able to still see you all. So to Your Excellency, thank you for the host, and Moulana Navlakhi and Zaida, thank you all for having me participate in this panel. What I'd like to showcase today is just a little case study of our province, the state of the Western Cape, which is the greater area around Cape Town on the southern tip of Africa, and how we've approached the aspect of and the huge potential for halal globally. So next slide. As a strategy, as an organization, I head up the economic development for this state, this province, and economic recovery is really focused entirely on creating jobs. In a country where we have still a large unemployment rate, this is our key focus. And we have 3 areas: making it easier to do business, energy resilience and getting our communities off the grid, but very importantly, driving foreign direct investment and exports. Next slide. And as part of that, we have a real focus in our region on agri-processing. So, and it's got a broad set of targets and goals, but the main goal, one of the main goals, and the one that we feel has the hugest potential, is growing the Western Cape's share of the global halal market. And we currently have just 1% of that huge potential. And we feel even if we shift, we double that from 1 to 2%, it would have a dramatic impact on the economic situation for people at every level in our economy. Next slide. So there's various ways that we've looked at these halal opportunities. And it starts with, first of all, the production capacity. And the Moulana has outlined the depth and the level of expertise, the level of historical experience that we have. And it's people are sometimes surprised that it's not only that we're a highly sophisticated export community with a very good port and airport, but we also have strong higher educational institutions, technical support organizations that do things like world-class research and development, and also a lifestyle that is where the concept of halal is not only applicable to Muslim communities, but the idea of ethical food production and safe and healthy food production is what comes through in many companies. And for me, the real essence of halal is exactly that, is food that is safe for consumption and is ethically sourced as well. So, and then the other area that has a large potential, of course, as Moulana indicated as well, is the tourism and trade between our countries, both historically because of our connections. I mean, my family also, I can trace my roots all the way back to South Sulawesi in Indonesia. So there's large historical connections between our two parts of the world. Next slide. So what we did then is we built a strategy over a period of about 5 years. We had a staged strategy, and I won't go through all the details of all my slides, but it's really an overview of how we stepped down and said, first of all, we needed to have effective governance, and it's organizations like SANHA and some of the other certification bodies that make it possible for us to be recognized globally. So we looked at how do we standardize that, how do we make all those organizations world class, so that exporters have the potential to have more access to certifying bodies, whichever part of the country they happen to be located in. We then, using the Malaysian example, we actually visited your country in, I think, 5 years ago and saw the huge potential of the concept of a halal hub or a processing hub. And we did a feasibility study, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. And then we also want to focus on the value chain production. But next slide, and I'll take you through some more details. So as a halal hub, this slide is not really too visible, it's quite small, but we essentially identified 3 potential sites, did a business case, packaged it, and looked at how do we create a site that is export orientated. Next slide. We then had a couple of decisions to make. Was this going to be government-led, investor-led, or a combination of the two? And in a country where, as Moulana has said, we only have 2 or 4% of the population is in fact Muslim, it was never going to be entirely government-led. So it was dependent on international investment, and still to this day the success of this halal program will depend on the international community and investors seeing the potential for it. So we did a prospectus of 3 potential sites, as I indicated, looked at all the potential development opportunities in such a hub. Next slide. So we identified particular sites and then went out with our pack, sort of walked it around the world, including going to the World Halal Congress and other in Europe and in the USA. And what we found was we actually did not during this time find a particular investor for a dedicated industrial park. What we then did was we repositioned our strategy to, in fact, see the Western Cape, our whole region, which is a greater 100-kilometer region around Cape Town, as a single hub. And what we believe is that the whole of Cape Town is in fact a halal hub, because what you find is you'll get halal processing opportunities in various industrial parks around the region. And around that, we continued, even though we now don't have one particular site called an halal industrial park, we believe the strategy of positioning the Western Cape as a hub will still have benefits. And we then proceeded to focus on some of the other areas which form a key part of the halal strategy. Next slide. So the first part of that is our investment promotion. That's looking at potential investment opportunities, and we still to this day remain open to that. The prospectuses are out there, the case studies have been done, and we remain available for that kind of investment. Next slide. The next pillar was looking at export promotion, and that started everywhere from, first of all, making sure organizations are certified, but we actually then put individual small suppliers onto export advancement programs, and about 50 companies in the last few years have gone on export advancement programs. Some of them have gone on trips to Jakim and to other parts of the world to actually open and expand opportunities for export. And that's actually advanced to where we now have a Cape export portal where these businesses are able to remotely put their information on a portal. And as you know, because of COVID, we needed to find those alternative digital means of doing this. Next slide. The certifying bodies. Moulana, your organization has really been leading. I mean, when I say we've needed to strengthen halal compliance, it was in fact to bring some of the other certifying bodies up to the level of SANHA. And we haven't worked directly with you recently because you're leading in that space. But we visited Jakim. We looked at that as an example of where we needed to be. But as you've said, there's an historical there's a real history of quality and professionalism within that area. Next slide. I'm about to wrap up. I'll go briefly. In our country, we have a similar issue to in Malaysia of the idea that people from previously disadvantaged background need to be developed. So we focus a lot on the supplier development in that area. Next slide. And then the Africa Halal Week actually was inspired by the Mihas World Halal Congress, and we've tried to replicate in our country, where we have a single week where we have focused on all aspects of halal, from export, trade, fashion, and tourism. So thank you very much, Nazareen. I will leave it at that. Thank you, and I'll hand back to you.
Rashid, Jazakallah for that very enlightening presentation. I think what you've given us insight particularly into is the capacitation of businesses both across both platforms, or I would say both countries or contexts. And this is really important, especially in the post-pandemic world. What do we do and how do we do it? So that's going to be interesting to talk about more. Appreciate the presentation. Coming up in our panel, before we go to His Excellency, our High Commissioner, we've got Zaida and Ms. Zaida Enver, CEO of Pure Grit, talking to us about South Africa's current situation in terms of being a major halal producer in the world. I'm looking forward to that. Welcome, Ms. Zaida. Audio, Zaida, if our organizers can please check audio. And if our panelists can also indicate if they could hear Zaida or not.
Shall I start again?
Sounds good. You're coming through loud and clear.
Great. Assalamu alaikum to the very esteemed panel. I'm very happy to be here to partake in this panel. And yes, to all of our esteemed guests who are listening in. I have to say that it's pretty cold in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in fact, this morning. But here we go. Nazareen, to begin to answer your question, I'd like to add a little bit of context. South Africa has a population, like the Moulana alluded to, of 58 million people, and 1.5% of them are Muslims. Historically, like we've mentioned before, we've come from a group of Malays and Indians, of indentured laborers, who've come to South Africa mainly as artisans and businessmen and traders. Apartheid in South Africa, together with sanctions and segregation, you wouldn't think so though, had two very positive impacts on the halal economy. Sanctions on the one hand, forced Muslim traders to become self-sufficient, to source locally, to produce locally, to trade locally. And this has created a history of family-owned and family-run businesses that have actually spanned decades and has really been the foundation of our halal economy as we see it today. Segregation on the one hand has created a greater sense of community to the preservation of our shared spirituality and our beliefs. And Muslims catering to Muslims had created a vibrant shared economy. So when we look at our halal economy, we have to actually look at the depth and the scope of what this $3.2 billion industry is all about. It's not just made up of the food and beverage sector. It includes travel and tourism, which caters to the domestic and international Muslim traveler, modest fashion, which includes in and outer garments, leisure wear, swimwear, the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry, which includes beauty, self-care products, Islamic banking and finance, including investment, the services and the products of which are comparable to those of major leading banks and Islamic houses of the Islamic world. And Moulana has also alluded to the fact that Islamic schools and institutes that provide Arabic instruction in South Africa are some of the well sought after by international scholars and have been rated the best in the world. Over the past 20 years, though, technology and innovation in product development has seen a significant growth in entrepreneurial activity from millennials as well as women developing and marketing export quality products such as alcohol-free sparkling wines and beverages, creams that treat medical skin conditions, wine-censored 100% natural soy aromatherapy candles that are now being exported to international spas around the world, vitamins and diet supplements, including protein shakes, baby foods, and baby treats, and that's just to mention a few. But all of these sectors, though, in unison, have created a very robust halal economy. South African producers, through taking this holistic approach towards halal and a halal lifestyle, are now able to talk directly and attract a well-informed and well-traveled global Muslim. This holistic approach and well-established sector activity is underpinned really with a stringent accreditation and certification process by leading certification authorities. And this is what has made South Africa one of the smallest Muslim populations in the world, one of the top 5 halal product producing countries, an industry, as I've mentioned before, which is worth over $3.2 billion with an anticipated growth of 2%. Over 60% of our products on our South African shelves are certified halal, and they're consumed not just by Muslims, but by non-Muslims who are looking at a healthier option and ethical production with the traceable farm-to-fork practices. A large proportion of this food is exported predominantly Muslim countries in North Africa. It is not very clear about the percentages that are being exported though. However, what is clear is that 50% of all of our fast-moving consumer good traders into Africa are South Africans, and 35% of these are Muslim. In the case of the rest of the continent though, South Africa has always been seen as a springboard into Africa, not only because of its strategic location, but also because of our affable trade relations with the continent. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has 56 countries signed up, is set to increase continental trade by 54%. This in an economy that's worth $2.6 trillion US. So really, what is the global attraction for South African halal producers? And this lies in the fact that post-apartheid, South Africans have traveled and attended international trade events, and they now understand the business nuances and the barriers to trade into these markets. They can obtain support from Islamic financial institutes that are offering really competitive funding to access these new markets. They have established a quality and stable supply chain and management systems, and they're now starting to explore things like blockchain technology to streamline and secure their processes. They use apps and software to manage crop rotation. They microchip their livestock to prevent theft, but also to manage its well-being. They have sophisticated technology-driven logistics and freighting options. And together with this, we have a really mature infrastructure in South Africa. We have access to government support through initiatives that promote business growth, sustainability, and international market access. As importantly, though, is certification, and all of us have alluded to this, which gives products instantaneous global recognition and global access. So over the past 7 years, my company has worked with local halal producers and global buyers, and I have seen the growth. I've really seen growing requests. In fact, I've actually seen a yearning for companies to collaborate with international partners. I strongly believe that these strategic alignments will give competitive advantage, and inshallah, together we can enter new markets, and with our collective strength, we can establish a significant market share. Thank you, Nazareen.
Zaida, Jazakallah for that presentation. Gives us a very comprehensive view of what it means for the South African landscape, especially with halal production. And we're going to explore that a bit more in our upcoming panel discussion. We have around 15 minutes left, going on to 14 minutes in this particular presentation. But before we go into a panel discussion, I would like to invite now, if he's available, His Excellency Mr. Dave Malcomson, our High Commissioner for South Africa to Malaysia, to give us his thoughts on the presentations that have happened so far, but also what he thinks about how we're moving forward between Malaysia and South Africa. Mr. Malcomson.
Terima kasih, Nazareen. I hope you can hear me now.
I can hear you loud and clear. Oh, we don't see you up on screen, but I certainly hear you.
My apologies for the technical difficulties earlier. I've now had to change devices. Also, thank you very much to the speakers. I think you've encapsulated very much what we wanted to convey to our Malaysian friends today. And selamat pagi to all of you. I'm very pleased that we have been given this opportunity to showcase South Africa as a major halal producer globally to this august audience. Thank you to MyTrade and the Malaysian Ministry of International Trade and Industry in this regard. We all have much to do in terms of picking up the pieces left by the pandemic and to re-establish our businesses, contacts, and supply chains. It is clear that we have to look at the world with new attitudes shaped by new realizations. In this regard, we need to look at strong partnerships with like-minded partners and countries. South Africa and Malaysia enjoyed very close relations during the 1990s into the early 2000s, and our relationship at that time was based on mutual technical cooperation, trade, investment, and a shared promotion of South-South policies. We also shared and still share today concerns for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. South Africa benefited from and also adopted many policies from Malaysia. However, for a number of reasons, our partnership has not been as vigorous for some years now, and it is high time that we reinvigorated the partnership to become a truly mutually beneficial friendship. In this regard, obviously, one of the most exciting sectors for cooperation is in the field of halal. We are a country that values our historical and cultural links with Malaysia, and our Cape Malay and Muslim communities in South Africa bear testament to this. These early contacts can also be seen in our cuisine and also in some of the words we use, such as blatjan and asbak. South Africa today has become one of the 5 largest producers of halal products worldwide, and it is estimated that 60% of all retail products in South Africa carry halal certification. It is estimated, as Ms. Enver said, that approximately $3.2 billion constitutes the South African halal industry today, and halal certification extends beyond the food industry to every facet of the consumables industry, including beverages, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, tourism, and finance. This is despite the fact that Muslims form only a small percentage of the population, and I believe this can be explained by halal being increasingly seen as a health and lifestyle choice rather than a religious issue. Also, South Africa, using its sophisticated and well-developed halal infrastructure and diversified economy, coupled with the linkages we have with Africa, is able to tap into the huge Muslim population on the continent, some 700 million Africans being Muslim. South African traders make up around 50% of the continent's fast-moving consumer goods sector, and the various halal authorities in South Africa have assisted other African countries to set up halal certification bodies, including Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and Mozambique. All of this means that an exciting business opportunity exists for Malaysian traders and investors. At present, less than 1% of Malaysian exports go to Africa, and South Africa has excellent manufacturing and logistics infrastructure and a ready-made distribution network into Africa that Malaysia can capitalize on by forming joint ventures and establishing halal parks with South African manufacturers to produce halal certified products for this huge African market that is integrating and opening up under the African Continental Free Trade Area. South Africa can be a gateway for cooperation into our region, just as Malaysia can also be a gateway for South Africa and Africa into ASEAN. South Africa produces many halal products that would suit the taste of consumers in Malaysia, and the pandemic has shown the dangers of only having a limited set of countries providing your food imports. In order to secure food security, Malaysia needs diversified supply chains. In this regard, South Africa and Africa present a viable source of quality food at reasonable prices. Quality South African beef has already made an impact on the Malaysian market, and Jakim recognizes 3 of our certification bodies in South Africa. Africa today is on the move, providing high returns on investment. Therefore, people need to look at the new picture of an Africa rising and forget the old stereotypes. Africa is the future of food production and supply, with 60% of the world's available arable land. In conclusion, we are calling for a reset of relations between Malaysia and Africa, as well as between Malaysia and South Africa. We in South Africa are on the road to recovery, and we are ready, willing, and able to partner with our Malaysian friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. That is much appreciated. And the message that you send across for increased and better, deeper, more transparent relations between Malaysia and South Africa with the prospect of Africa rising is indeed a very optimistic one. We have 8 minutes left for a panel discussion, which gives us a little bit of time, but we can look at maybe one point in order to bring together all the discussions that we've had today. Jakim, I know last year we've read that their ISO accreditation adoption of one brings further excellence to the standards that are set, and I know Moulana Navlakhi would attest to this. I've also seen that ASEAN's e-commerce bill, which was released at the end of August, there's a call for it to ensure product compliance to Islamic law. With these kind of changes and developments, considering we are in a post-pandemic world, to all my panelists, I would like to focus on particularly the halal parks. It's something I picked up from Rashid's presentation. What would, and this is just one question we can quickly look at in the last moments that we have. Why would a halal park be so important for South Africa-Malaysia interaction, and how would that look for the rest of Africa? What are the options for companies to trade, for us to set up as particular attraction points for travelers? And what are the certification standards we look at going behind that? We can start with you, Ms. Zaida Enver, please.
Nazareen, haven't spent so much time. We've worked in this halal space for at least 7 years now, and haven't spent so much time with producers of products and services. Now, most of these companies are looking for collaborations, and I think that's in a space that we play in at the moment, both international and domestic collaboration is important. In South Africa, we look at a plethora of producers from really companies who are large and have been exporting to markets globally over the past 2 or 3 decades, to companies that are really small. And we have a gap in the middle of medium-sized companies. And Rashid and I have discussed this at length on quite a few occasions. I think that to bring these smaller companies into the fray and to make them export ready, I think collaboration is required. Collaboration not just from local companies, but collaboration from international companies as well. I think those collaborations, when we look at skills transfer, when you look at investment, South African companies are willing to spend time and sweat equity. But when we look at these investments coming in, I think a halal hub like this will help promote these companies and actually give them more access to international markets.
Got you.
So more so though, you know, with South Africa being strategically located, I think these hubs would need to be strategically located as well. And with the industrial development zones that we have available in South Africa, I think if we align those to the halal hubs that we're talking about, I think that kind of expansion will work really well for South Africa and our expansion into Africa as well.
Expansion into Africa. Rashid, I want to move on to you. And Zaida, you used the word collaboration. In looking at the Western Cape's bid to create the Halal Park, to create the Halal Hub, along with partners in Malaysia and moving into the ASEAN region, how is that example looking right now, considering we are in post-pandemic trade and travel?
Very briefly, I think we've indicated quite extensively how ready we are for this trade. So I think it's really dependent on demand. I think where our High Commissioner and all our foreign officers can help us is to create that demand. That pull is what is needed. And I agree with Zaida, the collaboration between large and small businesses in the value chains are important so that people can meet that supply. Often people get an order for, you know, 1 million, 2 containers full of a product, and a small supplier will simply not be able to comply. So the partnerships are key, but we essentially remain on standby, Nazareen. The potential is there, and we're now looking for those orders, and we're looking for those potential investors who see South Africa as a production base for their global products. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashid. Before I come to you, Moulana Navlakhi, I want to talk about the movement with the certification component of it. Dave, Rashid and Zaida both alluded to the demand that's required, the Malaysia-South Africa context, and of course setting up South Africa to also pursue the African opportunity. In the post-pandemic time, which is now, everyone's talking about this optimism of moving. With the halal context, how is it looking for you as a representation for South Africa to Malaysia? What's happening at the moment?
No, thank you very much. What I've picked up is almost a dichotomy, where we had this very strong relationship up until about 2005, and then it lapsed. You can find very few Malaysians that have actually visited South Africa since 2005. But having said that, through the pandemic, there is this realization that they need to be looking at new partnerships. And the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's just left office, himself noted when we met with him that Malaysia needs to be looking at other sources of supply. They need to be looking at other supply chains. Currently, the bulk of their food imports come from just 3 countries. So South Africa provides a very good option for them, as well as other parts of Africa, for A, high quality priced goods, but B, we are be able to match them in terms of the requirements for halal, for the halal sector. So I think there is this excitement that I'm detecting from my meetings with HDC, with DVS, with other participants in the Malaysian governments and business circles, to re-establish a new relationship with South Africa that goes back to the strength of the relationship we had in the 90s. And I think the Halal Parks is one of the key initiatives we should be working towards. And we'll certainly do what DDG asked and try and draw up the demand that we can respond to at home.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dave. Talking about the demand and the excitement that's been created, which means that the need to keep on the certification standard side and looking at the developments we just alluded to, the ISO accreditation, which came, the e-commerce bill that ASEAN is pushing right now. Moulana Navlakhi, how would you describe the current state of making sure certification standards are kept on par, especially as people try to move into, again, I'm saying it, the post-pandemic travel and trade, because that's exactly where we are, and markets are opening up, and as is travel.
Yeah, I think we must keep in mind that the whole world is moving towards integrity and accreditation. The process was initiated by the Gulf countries, by Dubai specifically, in their Vision 2020, where they required all products imported into Dubai to be certified by organizations that have ISO certification. And this was about 5-6 years ago that organizations were informed of this criteria and condition. And so it went along. We have other countries also that have now required all products to be certified in accordance with ISO standards. And it's all about excellence. It's all about perfection. It's all about systems. It's all about ensuring, farm to fork traceability. So these are areas that we've embraced almost a decade ago. And yes, it is an imperative. And the West Grow and the Western Cape government and TIKZN have taken a lot of interest in developing this sector, because definitely, I mean, at the end of the day, the quality of the products that South Africa has is something that the world has not been exposed to due to the various challenges that our economy has faced. So yes, I must say that South Africa, in every respect, whether it be in respect of the products, the quality of the products, the service integrity in terms of halal certification, is par excellence.
Jazakallah for that, Moulana Navlakhi. Excellence, demand, and better bilateral relations. I think that's what we've been able to glean from this short, succinct discussion. We've had an excellent panel, very esteemed guests. His Excellency, Mr. Dave Malcomson, our High Commissioner for South Africa to Malaysia, Mr. Rashid Toefy, Deputy Director General for Economic Development and Tourism in the Western Cape, Moulana Navlakhi, a Director at the South African National Halal Authority, as you know, SANHA, and Ms. Zaida Enver, CEO of Pure Grit Events and Exhibitions Management, and my personal thanks to you for collaborating, coordinating all of us. A very special thank you to Matrade for putting together this excellent conversation. I am Nazareen Ebrahim from Naz Consulting International. We are a premier African communications business, and we wish you a wonderful weekend ahead. Take care and greetings to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers.